As someone who's fancied himself as a Sony fan ever since the PS1, I've gotta say that if they don't get their carp together, then I'm seriously considering becoming an Xbox boy for the first time ever. What's Sony up to that's so bad? Well, there are a few bones I'd like to pick with them, but I'll talk about that more in another video. But what's easily the biggest problem is that a spokesperson at Sony recently told the Wall Street Journal that they'd begun imposing limitations on sexually explicit content for PlayStation games, which as it turns out was the reason for ridiculous instances of censorship, such as Devil May Cry losing a butt, Nekopara going from rated M to friggin' E, and Senran Kagura 7 being impossible to release altogether. Meanwhile, on the family-friendly Nintendo Switch, we've got the softcore cable porn known as Senran Kagura Reflections being presented as the developers intended. I go into a lot more detail in the review I did for that game in the name of research, though. And trust me, it was for research.
I'm not a pervert!
But my point is that you know you're doing something wrong when you're out censoring the same company that nerfed Snake's ass and won't allow voice chat in their first-party games. And if this censorship problem was guaranteed to stick with the PS5, then I'd just buy multiplat someplace else and call it a day. But the producer of Senran Kagura 7, Kenichiro Takaki, believes that these new guidelines are gonna eventually spread to other consoles as well. So if we don't put a stop to this censorship right now, then it could lead to a grim future for gaming. Now you may be asking yourself, what could we even do to stop this? Or maybe even why losing a few boobs is that big of a deal. If so, then strap yourselves in, take your eyes off the road so you can pay attention to me, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the two-time Emmy Award nominee for Best Supporting Actor Cameron, to tell you why we need to nip the censorship of gaming in the bud now, and how we can do it. I think the reason why we need to fight for developers' rights to put boobs in games should they choose to do so goes without saying. But even if you don't have any interest in playing Senran Kagura 7, or pausing Devil May Cry to stare at a chick's butt, doesn't mean you can't see why it's important for these things to be possible in games. Cause first of all, even the sexiest console games hardly qualify as adult entertainment. And trust me, I've been featured in enough of that to know what I'm talking about. But even if a developer wanted to go all out, I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't be allowed to. I mean, it's not like companies that make Blu-ray players can ban movies. And I know comparing consoles to VCRs is apples and oranges, cause developers have always needed permission to publish games on pretty much every console after the Atari 2600. Plus, Sony's been known to censor games in the past like Police Knots and XXXX to name a few examples. But when Microsoft and even Nintendo are letting developers run wild, then it kinda puzzles me that Sony would feel the need to water games down even more than usual. According to their spokesperson though, the reason for this excessive censorship is apparently in response to the Me Too movement. But seeing as how it's rather unlikely that anyone's gonna accuse a video game of a sex crime, I think it's safe to assume that what they were actually referring to is the hypersensitivity in North America in general. And to be honest, I can't completely blame Sony for being concerned about this, cause in 2019, people are fiending all over the place looking for any reason whatsoever to be offended because it makes them feel powerful. Just look at Persona 5's Joker simply existing in Smash Ultimate. It seems innocent enough, right? Well, think again, cause jobbers who have no direction in their life assumed that one of the Persona songs added to the game says retarded. But rather than simply, oh, I don't know, Googling the lyrics, they just accepted this assumption as fact. And as we all know, when you make an assumption, your ass will ump and shun you. The problem in 2019 isn't that people are actually offended by everything. It's that people want to be offended because it makes them feel powerful to have the ability to accuse people or organizations much bigger than themselves of atrocities, even if they're not actually there. After all, if you want to have the biggest building in town, then it's a lot easier to tear all the other ones down than to build your own up. And I know most people don't have this weak-ass mindset, but the people who do are so much louder than everybody else combined. Because first of all, they don't have anything else going on in their lives to spend their time with. And the trickiest part's that nobody wants to speak out against hypersensitivity out of fear of being labeled as evil, or in Sony's case, creepy or sexually insensitive or whatever. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely injustices and bad things going on for sure, but pretending to be offended by petty things like boobs in video games just irritates the majority, which then allows things that are actually wrong to slip through the cracks or get a pass. And I know no one's really complaining about ass cleavage in games yet, but the fact that Sony felt the need to censor themselves before anybody had the chance to manufacture controversy really says a lot about where we are in 2019. Although, while it's easy for me to understand Sony's mindset, it still doesn't excuse the fact that they're sacrificing freedom of expression to avoid trouble from people who aren't actually mad. And I'm well aware that even Microsoft and Nintendo still have guidelines. But if Sega didn't stand firm with games like Mortal Kombat, then console games today might not even have blood. For now, Sony might just be getting rid of partial nudity, which pretty much confirms that GTA 6 isn't going to be an exclusive, by the way. But if we don't nip this problem in the bud right now, then it won't be too long before games are tamer than a snail's ass. And if you think about it, isn't it kinda silly that Sony's more concerned with sexual content than things like murder? Apparently Sony's big concern with sexual content is that it can make them a target for legal or social action. And I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty friggin' ridiculous for a multi-billion-dollar company like Sony to think they could be sued over a digital butt. I mean, what kind of court case can anybody even make out of that? Is there some kind of concern that these M-rated games that kids can't buy in the first place would turn people into sexual deviants like my neighbor Terry? Cause let me tell you, that guy's been a sexual deviant since the Nixon administration. And besides, porn exists, which you can play on your PS4 via a disc or with the internet. So who really cares about lines of code that resemble partial nudity? And why throw your integrity in the trash just to feed the egos of non-gamers, some of which who call themselves journalists? When a company like Sony caves, it sets a bad example that pretending you're offended will give you power. Sony's essentially being that parent who buys a toy for their child who's screaming, pissing, and shitting all over the floor at Kmart. But before Sony's problem snowballs out of control to the point where it becomes a problem for the entire industry, there is something we can do, not just to save side boobs in games, but freedom of expression for developers as well. And that's to just simply not buy these censored games or even support Sony at all if they keep pushing it, which I know is a lot easier said than done. Cause like me, I'm sure most of you don't care about video game characters dropping dong. After all, if you want to see wieners in gaming, then we've already got the Smash Ultimate stage creator. And with Sony having so many notable exclusives, there's probably a lot of people who are just gonna buy a PS5 anyway. And since I'm sure there's a lot of people who won't buy both consoles, it'll be tough to get everyone to make a pact and agree to only buy Xbox multiplats next gen. But back in the 90s, Nintendo had a lot more exclusives than Sega did. And despite the fact that multiplats were generally graphically superior on the SNES, Nintendo's censorship bit them in the ween, causing them to change their ways. Which is exactly what needs to happen with Sony. If their censored multiplats sell significantly less than on other platforms, then they're gonna have no choice but to stop being buttholes. And we all know Sony loves money more than my stepdad loves impersonating cops. So we need to speak with our wallets or else they're never gonna listen. And I'm not trying to get everyone to boycott the PS5. I mean, this threat's still in its infancy, and I can't act like I don't want to play Last of Us 2. But I think it's important for any gamers who care about freedom of expression that we try our best to either buy Xbox versions of censored games whenever possible, or just skip the censored games altogether if you're not going to get both next-gen consoles. And whether you love or hate Microsoft, hopefully they take advantage of the same opportunity Sega took in the past, instead of preemptively submitting to overly sensitive buttholes. If too many people say friggin' and just stick to the PlayStation routine, then we don't have any right to get mad in the future when guns in video games are replaced with walkie-talkies. But I'll tell you, two people who'd never do us dirty like that are today's patrons of the day, Red Jar and Leo Lombardazzi. If you want to join these two legends, then consider supporting this channel on Patreon for loot boxes and Polaroids in the mail. And if you pick up one of our shirts or mugs that are guaranteed to land you a hot date, then you can make cameos in our video doing whatever you want by simply sending us pictures or videos of you rocking it like these badasses right here. What do you think about Sony's censorship, though? Am I overreacting, or do you think it's important that we nip this in the bud as soon as we can? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll pin whatever I find most entertaining or intriguing. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to see more videos like this. And if you want to help this channel grow, then simply liking and sharing goes a long way. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.